Good morning, it's Pastor Marty from the Afternoon Drive. This is our weekend YouTube edition. Well, Peter Buttigieg, I guess that's how you pronounce his name. I don't think anybody really knows how to pronounce it. I've heard, even commentators on cable news, when they get to his name, Buttigieg, it's like having something stuck in the back of your throat. Anyway, he's one of the, 418 people that are running for the Democratic nomination. Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, recently said on the Hugh Hewitt show that it's time. It's the right thing to do. Well, what's time and what's the right thing to do? Remove Thomas Jefferson's name from the annals of American history. He wants his name off schools. He wants his name off of whatever. And it's time to fix our past. Here we go. More revisionist history. And this is a problem. This is a serious problem. And I'll tell you why it's a problem. First of all, we haven't taught young people how to put things into historical perspective. No one here is making a case for slavery. No one here is in any way defending the atrocities that literally tens of thousands of indentured individuals, slaves, in particular, black African Americans endured in being brought here, the harsh treatment they received, the treatment they received in transit once they arrived. No one in any way is making light of that or defending it. Let's just be clear. But let's also be clear about the fact that if we don't learn to put things in historical perspective, then we're actually losing history. And when we lose history, we lose what we can learn from history. Now, Thomas Jefferson authored the Declaration of Independence, was key in the forming of our Constitution. It's interesting because at one time, Thomas Jefferson was the poster boy for American liberalism in this country. They were constantly referring to the writings of Thomas Jefferson. I'll give you a hint. The only place that we have any mention of the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution, the way some liberal progressive organizations try to insinuate that the church cannot be involved in politics and therefore we can't have things like nativity scenes being displayed on public property, separation of church and state. This lying canard. It appears nowhere in the Constitution. It was, however, contained in a letter written by Thomas Jefferson, addressing the concerns of the clergy of the day who were worried that America might become a amoral, immoral society in the absence of God, seeing as there was no state religion. And Jefferson, in his letter explaining to these pastors, you will constantly have the right, forever, to be the moral voice for America. In fact, we need your voice, even involved in government, thundering from the pulpits. But there will be a separation of church and state, i.e., the state will never endorse one church over another. That's the separation of church and state. Now, Mr. Jefferson, yes, he owned slaves, as did George Washington, as did other founding fathers. But we have to look at it in the historical perspective of the day. Were they abusive to their slaves? Again, we can't keep comparing things of the past to the social acceptance of today. Because today, we make the case against Thomas Jefferson. Well, tomorrow, then, we make the case against who? Roosevelt, Eisenhower, JFK, Lyndon Johnson, because they were anti-gay. We start taking JFK's name off of things because, after all, he didn't want anyone who was outwardly or openly gay in his administration. I mean, where does this stop? And I'll tell you what the real driving agenda behind this. It is not about reparations and elevating the black community. The people that are pulling these strings and riling the black community up over the Founding Fathers couldn't give a rat's backside about the members of that community, nor do they care about improving their lot in life, because they've got them on the modern plantation of welfarism, and you're too stupid to take care of yourself, you're too stupid to get your own education and advance and do well in this country. We'll take care of you, you just keep voting for us. So they're not really interested in righting the wrongs. What they are wanting to do, and don't make any mistake about this, what they are wanting to do is rewrite the Constitution. Actually, they'd like to scrap it entirely and redo it. And you talk about the loss of rights, inalienable rights. You think free speech is being restricted now on social media platforms? You think that there are gun control issues now when we have a Second Amendment in place? Can you imagine if these people get to rewrite the Constitution? Because that's where this push is going. This canard over, we can't have a public display of Confederate flags, the Confederate soldiers' statues have got to come down, and we've got to get Jefferson's name off of things, because after all, he was a slave owner, he was a wicked, vile man. You know what? We can't trust these documents that govern our nation. They were written by slave owners. That's where this argument is headed. Make no mistake about it. That's where it's going. And so it is time for us to speak up and push back on this. The Founding Fathers, their legacy, it must be protected. I'm not saying that we don't talk about their flaws. But I am going to say this to any black Americans that are watching this video. Do you want to go back to your country of origin? Because I dare say that at this point in history, you have more freedom and economic opportunity and an ability to reach out and live this thing that's called the American dream than at any point in history. You have that opportunity to make that happen for yourself right here, right now. And if you really think that at this point we are that deeply rooted in hatred and racism to the core, then why stay and put yourself through it? Do you really want to go back to your country of origin? How are they living? What's their standard of living? What kind of rights do they have? And again, we're not in any way advocating, defending, or sticking up for the abuse and the mistreatment of our fellow men, whatever their race. But to go back 200 years in our history and start ripping pages out of our history books and rewriting revisionist history, we are not actually helping this generation or the generations to come. And if we allow the Constitution to be destroyed and rewritten, we will be a socialist nation. And that is the ultimate goal of the people that are fueling this fire. Make no mistake about it. They couldn't give a care about Black Lives Matter, couldn't give a care about your rights or reparation or any of that. They use that as a way to get you riled up, stirred up, and angry, and get simpletons like Peter Buttigieg, who thinks he's going to be Presidente, or wants to be Presidente, or they get that other moron, Beto O'Rourke, the Latino-Irish boy, on The View, constantly he's apologizing for being a man, he's apologizing for being white, he's apologizing for his privilege. All he does is apologize. Is that what he's going to do when he becomes president to other nations? I'm sorry we have more than you. Here, let me give you part of our national economy. I mean, these are the simpleton moron buffoons that are running for president on the liberal side of the aisle. And you already have Kamala Harris, who said that once she's president, if within 100 days Congress doesn't give her real restrictive gun control, she, on her own by executive order, is just going to start revoking the licenses of gun dealers. I guess we'll just totally defecate on the Constitution and the Second Amendment. Imagine now these people rewriting the Constitution. That's what they want. So they break it down and they make it a simple fight. Do you really want a Confederate flag, which is a symbol of hatred? Do you really want that in display where people can see it? So we have to pull things like the reruns of the Dukes of Hazzard, because there's a rebel flag painted on top of their car named the General Lee, and oh my goodness, General Lee fought to keep slavery intact. But see, because we don't think and we don't process, we haven't taught kids historical perspective, Lee wasn't defending slavery, he was defending Virginia, his home state. Most of the boys that fought in that Confederate War on the Confederate side didn't own slaves. They were poor country farm boys who were fighting in their mind for their homeland. Now we have teaching going on in our schools that not only is a complete rewrite and revisionist history, absent key events, because after all, we just can't talk about that. So we're not teaching kids to think. So now we're even dumbing down our SATs. They will now be graded not only on what you know, but what is your socioeconomic background. If I were a black American, I would be offended by that. If I were a Hispanic American, I would be offended by that, because what they're saying is, you're poor and you're stupid. If I was in Arkansas or Alabama living in a trailer, I'd be offended by that. You're poor. You're stupid. You know, I knew somebody else who was poor. Well, let me rephrase that. We know of someone else in history who was poor. Was a failure in a lot of things he tried. And ended up as the 16th President of the United States. Oh, and he helped free the slaves. Don't underestimate poor people that you think are ignorant just because they're poor. That's it. That's today's rant. Please hit the like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and tell people about it. Smack the bell and get my next notification. Have a great weekend.